Scott, you're recently retired. What was your title by the time you left Nike?
My official title was Global Director of Brand Heritage Narrative or something. I mean, just something like what? So I basically just call myself historian. It's not, I mean, there's no official role within the company because you've got to have everything follow into the nice HR
Yep.
pathways. But when I would say the first, I try to say the first thing, people would just look at me like, what are you talking about? And I'd say, I'm Nike's historian. I go, oh, that's really cool.
Heck
So
yeah, it
yes.
is. And how'd you find your way into the historian role?
Well, I created it actually. I was working in a position before that where I was the senior spokesperson for the company and was working with Phil Knight and senior executives and was facilitating their interviews with media. And I noticed that every time they would tell stories about our history or heritage, they would vary slightly. Sometimes from one person telling two different reporters a different story. So wasn't even just like executive to executive. Sometimes it was in the retelling, but from the same person. Nothing dramatic, but it just started coming to my mind that we are really reliant upon people's memories and an oral history telling, and not a corroborating and not fact checking and not making sure that we have the actual 100% story. So all that started germinating a little bit, and then I met with a couple of friends within the company. We started kicking around some ideas, and basically the point was we have a great archive full of amazing footwear and apparel and all sorts of cool stuff, but we don't really have anybody capturing the history and verifying the history. So I put together a proposal and coined the term DNA, Department of Nike Archives, and ran it by Phil, actually. And Phil must have liked it because I got a call a few months later saying that the head count had been approved and did I want the job? And I quickly said, absolutely. So I did that for the last 17 years or so of my career. I was there about almost
Wow.
30 years.
Okay, so for those people who don't know, can you tell? So were you were sort of a part of the DNA, Department of Nike Archives?
Correct. So there's two branches of the archives. One is the operations side. That's the management of the stuff, right? Got to have the shoes. You got to take care of the shoes. You got to know where the shoes are, the apparel, the collateral materials. So there was a whole operations team. And then the factor that I brought in, and then as I was able to hire more people, was the curation slash storytelling function. So I had a staff of 7 actually by the time I retired. I went from a one-man band to 7. And then that group essentially was responsible for mining and researching Nike's entire history across categories, sports, regions, people, events, marketing. There's just so many things to cover. And then I was more of the generalist. I would know more of the general history of Nike and especially more of the Blue Ribbon sports days, the earlier days. And then each of my staff members had their own areas of focus. So basketball, tennis, running, women's, things like that. Because it's just impossible. I mean, I'd love to have that brain bandwidth to be able to know everything about everything, but it's dizzying. So that was my role was before I left, was essentially to write herd on that group of 7 to make sure we were capturing our history.
It's incredible. Well, and y'all brought to life the DNA archive online as well, right? Because yeah, go ahead.
Yes, that was actually underway before or as I was retiring. We had a change in a position 2 or 3 spots above our department, and that person was much more supporting of taking DNA more directly to the public. We, for the longest time, literally forever, or for our existence, we were all internal only. We would work with media, but only with permission from Nike Legal or communications. So people would call us up and say, "Hey, I want to know about this or that," and I'd have to say, "I'm sorry, I can't help you." And I felt bad because it was, there are people who are fascinated by the company and they really wanted to learn, or they might have a great piece that they wanted to learn more about, and we would just be inundated if we started doing that. So I'd say about 3 months before I retired, that was October. I retired October of 21. There was a change of heart or a change of strategy, and so yes, I am thrilled to see that DNA is now becoming more connected directly to the external audiences that we're so interested in. So that to me is a great move forward.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I actually didn't know that it was available externally. I was just talking about as an employee the last few years. I remember that amazing DNA archive that started to get better curated, and it would have like a monthly feature, and it would have the deep archives that you could go into. I'm just kind of a nerd in that way, and I would go deep down the rabbit hole, and I'm a historian myself, but it started to get really good. I was also in brand, and so we were often like trying to tell the story of, this sneaker when it first came out, and what the story was. And so there was such good stuff in there.
Right, and so what you're referring to, I jumped ahead, but what I think you're referring to is a lot of it is the internal website that we did, the intranet site that really opened up DNA to the Nike world. I mean, literally,
yes,
because only people that are in the Portland area, the metro area, would even physically be able to access the archive building, and even among those, it's not open to any Nike person, any Nike employee just wants to pop in. Their badges won't work.
I know. So I actually want to pause you there real quick. I was an Eakin. Okay. So like I got the incredible privilege of going to the DNA archive, to the physical place. For people who don't know, will you tell people what that DNA physical location is and what they actually do? Because I think it's really interesting.
Absolutely. So the Department of Nike Archives is essentially what it sounds like, right? It's an archive, which means it is a repository, maybe a little bit too, not the right word, but it is basically a large, almost warehouse type building that houses a vast array of Nike products, all the way back to the hand-built shoes of Bill Bowerman in the 50s and 60s, some of the earliest design, a lot of designs, a lot of sketches, prototypes, footwear and apparel. There's everything. And Little Penny, the puppet that was used for the Little Penny ads, is in the archive. So you can literally go around the corner and go like, "Whoa, what's that doing here?" Or and it's just like a candy store, right? It's an amazing building. And then there's, as I said, a couple dozen. I don't know exactly how many people know, but a couple dozen employees that manage that for the use of and the education of inspiration of the current generation of employees. So the ones in Portland have the access to actually see the building. Creating the website we did over a decade ago, and then have refined it and improved it. That allowed us to take our storytelling globally, so that everyone has a chance, even if they can't physically be in the building, they can immerse themselves in the stories. And then one more thing about the building itself. So within the building, we had what we call rig rooms, and those are essentially smaller, almost like a standard conference room, maybe a little bit larger conference room, but it's completely tricked out. So you walk into one of the rooms and it's everything Nike soccer from 1971 to today. Another room is running, every running, not every running story, but a lot of them, women's, et cetera, et cetera. And those are amazing places. We used to do, and I'm sure they still do, a lot of great interviews in there, because they would be very inspirational, to bring in. We would bring in Andre Agassi into the tennis room, right, and then ask him to tell stories. Well, it's easy for him just to be in the room and then point and say that this. It makes for a much deeper interview and a story. So I miss. That's probably one thing, other than people, of course. That's probably the one thing I miss most, is just being able to go in those rooms and just be completely enveloped by the culture and the product. And it's so cool.
I agree. I'm with you. I'm over here cheesing. And as a matter of fact, you mentioned Agassi. That is literally that archive feature that y'all did. I remember I could hit like right click, save all. And I saved in like one click. I was able to download all of my favorite Agassi ads, print ads from the history. And that one was particularly inspiring to myself. So I'm glad you mentioned the Agassi one. Also, will you just share that the team who's there managing it, they have a certain amount of budget, and they're constantly looking and seeking out for original items from around the world? Is that right?
It's true. I don't know what the budget is now. It was never large enough. I mean,
no,
it never is. But
yeah.
And every once in a while, when just an absolute windfall type of collection, a collector was selling a big bundle of things that were just things we needed to have. But it was, sometimes it was 10 times or 20 times our actual annual budget. We would then go to Mark Parker or go to somebody at senior level and say, we need some help. And more often than not, they would come through for us, because, we weren't being capricious. We don't need everything, every shoe. In fact, a lot of people wonder do we have every shoe Nike's ever made, and we don't. I mean, not by a long shot. It would literally be overwhelming to the facilities to try to have every model, especially every colorway. Can you imagine? I mean, But so certain shoes where it is the story, like the Air Force One, maybe the Dunks, there's certain ones that we do try to get as many as we can, but there's no reason to have every Monarch, every, you know, sorry, Monarch, but
Don't disparage the Monarch, Scott.
I know the Monarch's a great shoe, especially now that I'm in the prime Monarch age demographic. But
you're in your Monarch years, yeah.
I am in my, well, actually, I've got a wide foot, so I'm more of a Pegasus guy. It's one of the few ones we always make in wide. But
well, the Monarch you can get in a wide as well, 4E at the factory store. It's always called out quite
okay. Well, maybe I will be a Monarch guy. I don't know. But anyway, so it's a little bit of art, a little bit of science, and a little bit of luck sometimes to identify. I mean, there's certain shoes we know we want to add to the collection. Some, obviously a moon shoe or something that's literally, there's only a dozen or so on the planet. So but even those we have to think about, right? I mean, I think we have one or maybe two. So I think a moon shoe recently was in an auction, and it was like, I think it got like $100,000 or some outrageous amount of money. And I know Nike didn't bid on it.
Yeah.
Or at least if they did, they dropped out early because it wasn't really, if we didn't have any of them, that would have been a good reason to jump on it. But at some point you have to go, that money could be used to bring in something better.
Sure. Yeah. My favorite, I think the most memorable thing that I saw in the DNA archive was the Batman boot. Which I don't think was like widely shown, but with Michael Keaton, the footwear that they had designed for him to wear during that. And of course, everybody knows about the Mag and Back to the Future.
Right.
And that was cool to see. But the Batman boot I thought was really interesting and hadn't been told, publicly many places.
No, and little side fact there actually are several pairs made because they also made the boots for Michael Keaton's stand-ins, their stuntmen. So
that's right.
And we also made shoes that the actors when they were not animatronic Jurassic Park dinosaurs, when they were actually actors doing quick cuts, they were wearing shoes specifically made by Nike that had, from a distance, would look like a lizard, but a lizard's foot, but obviously we're Nike shoes. So we have some of those in the archives too.
Incredible. Okay, so you helped write the position, which I love. I do think that's one of the best things about Nike too, is, if something doesn't exist, you can make it up. It's not always easy. I'm sure from the time from the time it was thought about to the time it actually got approved was a long process, but
it was.
But that is one of the beauties of the company. Okay, so let me start with, from a historian standpoint, what do you think is a part of Nike's history that is not the standard, founded in 1972, Goddess of Victory, Phil Knight, shoes in the van? What's maybe an undertold part of Nike's history that people don't know enough about?
Boy, there's quite a thing. I almost have to figure out what to choose, because one of the things actually I usually go to is, and you just mentioned, was the swoosh and the name Nike. So let me just real briefly, because I saw it yet again incorrect the other day. One of the things I hear most often is that the swoosh is the representation of the Nike goddess's wing, right? That was the inspiration for that, which is a great story and it sounds really logical, except for the swoosh came first. So the design was already created, and then they needed a name. So it's physically impossible for Carolyn Davidson to have been inspired by the name Nike, because it was not coined at that time, at least not for shoes. So that's the one where I just pull my hair out, because I can see why it happens, because it's so easy to make that assumption, but it's not true. So there's little things. I mean, one of the things I found out, one of the first things that I really found interesting to me was, when I first started in the archives, really getting and digging into it. So my first few months, I was essentially assessing what we have, right? What old timelines, old internal newsletters, memos back and forth, letters between Jeff Johnson and Phil Knight. And then also at the same time I was doing that, Kenny Moore was researching the book that he was about to write, and did write, about Bill Bowerman and the Men of Oregon. So Kenny, being a wonderful person, there it is, being a wonderful person, and his wife Connie, who was older, they were doing a lot of research at the University of Oregon archives, and he very graciously said, as long as I'm here making copies of these things, would you like me to make one for you? And I said, well, absolutely, anything related to Nike, of course, or the early people with Nike, like Steve Prefontaine and some of the other runners. So he started sending me materials, and in that was a lot of stuff that Bill Bowerman had donated to the University of Oregon archives. And within that were a lot of letters from Bill Bowerman to Adi Dassler, to other presidents of other footwear manufacturing companies in the 50s. And those letters were fascinating because you could hear in Bill's own voice his attempts to try to get some design ideas that he has to be manufactured by these companies. And thankfully for Nike and for Phil Knight, they didn't take him up on it. Nobody really responded. At least there was no responses that we had. I mean, people did respond, like Adi Dassler did respond, but it was more about the purchase of the shoes and where he could buy them in the United States. So I share all that because one of the early stories about Bill Bowerman was that he didn't like US, he didn't like shoes. He didn't like the running shoes at the time. He was trying to build better ones. So there's a little bit of truth to that. But he was really looking for an opportunity to get his own design ideas incorporated into a shoe. So when his former student, Phil Knight, comes knocking on the door in January of 1964 and says, I've got this contact with Onitsuka in Japan, and I'd like you to buy some of the shoes, I'll give you a deal on it. Bill immediately took it 100 times further than that and said, not only will I buy some shoes from you, but if you cut me in as a partner, we can make a deal. Because now Bill realized he has a potential conduit to a footwear manufacturer who would listen and take his ideas and turn them into what became the Cortez and a few other shoes that we still know today. So when you start peeling back those layers and you start seeing those stories are so much deeper, then that's both, it's kind of terrifying way, because you're like, oh my God, what else are we not telling fully, or what else, what are this? But on the other hand, on the flip side of that is, but oh my gosh, everything could have a cookie jar where you open it up and go, wow, look inside, and so that was the first epiphany I had, that we were going to be able to maybe tell stories in a new or deeper or more satisfying way.
Yeah. I feel like reading about Bill Bowerman, he gets completely lost in the sauce sometimes. Like the guy was in like 10th Mountain Division, like freaking trekking across the Italian Alps,
right.
at war. I mean, had a lot of really interesting civil rights intersections with the Olympics. And I mean,
he even came up with a precursor to Gatorade, right? I mean, it was like he was actually creating an electrolyte type of substitute before the folks down at the University of Florida were. So it could have been called Oregonade.
Yeah.
Or Duckade.
Duckade or something. Yeah, totally. And for those people who don't know, Kenny Moore was a former runner for Bill Bowerman. Is that right?
That is correct. Yeah, an award-winning journalist as well for Sports Illustrated.
Yes, incredible. I got to have lunch with Kenny at one point at Tracktown Pizza. I mean, it was, yeah.
How duck can you get?
Oh man, I'm telling you, I don't have a deep rooting interest, but obviously my time at Nike and the Kool-Aid that I drink is usually some Ducks Kool-Aid. There's definitely some Ducks moments in there that I really enjoy. So that's one of the underappreciated aspects of the history, perhaps the swoosh and the founding there. I don't know if you noticed, but in Air, I think they tried to pull the famous line of Phil not loving the name Nike, but they pulled that into the Air Jordan, where he didn't love the Air Jordan. I assume that's what they're pulling from. Is that right?
Well, considering the wording was almost exactly the same, I would say yes, that was, and I'm hoping, since I didn't work with them at all and I was never consulting with them, I'm hoping that was done somewhat tongue-in-cheek and not that they just got it wrong, because that would be a little disappointing, because it is fairly easy to find that. I mean, if you look for that story, and that's funny because you're leading right into what has always been since I first saw the movie back in the late March, early April, has been that little bugaboo of that's close to the story, but that's not the story, or that is what happened, but that's not the person who did it. So it's like one little thing after another. I'm like, yeah, no. And a lot of my friends, even a couple of people, longtime Nike folks, somewhat admonished me from the beginning and just said, Scott, it's not a documentary. It's just a Hollywood movie. Just enjoy it. So I tried really hard, I swear. And then the first time I saw it, I saw it 3 times now for a couple different reasons, but first time I saw it they did the opening montage, and I was like, okay, cool, it's the 80s. Oh, that's pretty funny. Oh, I remember that. That song's a good one. And then within the first 5 minutes, they were talking about Just Do It and how it came about. And I was like, Just Do It didn't come out till 1988. This movie's set in 1984. And I leaned over to my wife and I go, here we go. And then like for the next hour and a half, I was like, oh God, no, 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 no. And then at the end of it, people are like, did you like it? And I said, I actually did. I thought it was entertaining. But what my worry was, and which has unfortunately come to fruition, is even though it isn't a documentary, a lot of people are treating it and reacting to it as if it were. And they're reporting on it. And they're talking about Dolores Jordan, what an incredible contract negotiator she was. That didn't happen. She was not involved in the, so that's where I get a little frustrated because it's not what happened.
Okay, so tell us the Dolores Jordan, what was her actual interaction, or how did the contract go?
Well, so how it actually went was Rob Strasser. Well, okay, let me back up. Sonny Vaccaro absolutely identified that Michael Jordan was an athlete that Nike should seriously consider. So that part is 100% true. Where it starts to fizzle is Sonny's role after that is fairly minimal. In the movie, he does everything. In real life, he was there to sort of launch the idea. And then Rob Strasser, as the head of marketing, was essentially the man that did almost everything else except for the shoe, and which was Peter Moore. And so Strasser they made a big deal about how Dolores Jordan negotiated for a percentage of the royalties of the shoe. And again, that's where truth is woven there. That was in the contract. It wasn't Dolores' idea, and it wasn't even groundbreaking. Nike had been doing that. Rob Strasser had been doing that since the mid-1970s. It was called the Pro Club, and about a dozen, I think, or so NBA players have been getting royalties for shoes that they were wearing. So what's portrayed in the movie, again, was the contract was between Rob Strasser and David Falk, the agent, was nothing like it was portrayed. I mean, I sat there and I'm like, this makes no sense. We wouldn't have said this is a deal breaker because we were already doing deals like that. And then Dolores wouldn't have negotiated the contract. That's why you have a big time agent like David Falk, right? That's his job, is to negotiate the contracts. And then I even asked 2 or 3 people who are contemporaries of Sonny Vaccaro in football and baseball and some of the other sports. I said, when you guys did your contracts at that same time in the 80s, did you actually broker the deals? And they said, no, we would set the table, but Rob was the closer. So it comes down to, the thing is, a lot of the stuff that happened in the movie was done by Rob Strasser and or Peter Moore or even other people. And in the movie, it's almost singularly attributed to Sonny Vaccaro, and that's just not historically accurate.
Well, that was always before I even saw the movie, I did a video and I just pumped everybody's brakes and I said, hey, well, as a historian, the reason I refer to myself as a historian is because I got a degree in ancient history in college, which is, what I studied, which ended up being just kind of funny and tongue-in-cheek with Nike and all that. But you always consider the source. And I was like, hey, Sonny Vaccaro is the primary source for this movie. So let's consider who the source is. And all the other people at Nike are sort of cut out of the mix. And he sort of famously fell out with Nike, or at least moved on from Nike. So let's just consider that before we take this as gospel. It's so interesting that you say that, though, about the contract, because, I mean, the scene with Dolores is essentially the pinnacle scene of the movie.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And not only did she not negotiate it, he never went to North Carolina. So all that whole 6 or 7 or 8 minute scene where he's in North Carolina and the agent's screaming at him and Rob Strasser's screaming at him and he's talking to Dolores, that never happened. He's even admitted that. I can't remember on what show, it's Dan Patrick or some show he was interviewed on. He admitted that was a little bit of license or something like that. I'm like, it's not a little bit of license, it's fabricated.
Right.
So it didn't happen.
Yeah.
Just like the end scene, the other pivotal scene to me, I probably should say spoiler alert, if anybody's listening to this and hasn't seen the movie, but that's the pivotal scene at the end where they're making the pitch to the Jordan family that essentially obviously was critical to get him to join or to sign with Nike. Rob and Peter gave. The 2 or 3 people I talked to who were in that room with him, they said, yeah, I think Sonny was in the room, but I don't think that you don't remember him saying anything. Well, if you see the movie, he basically elbows the other two aside, and so, he realizes that he's got to save the day, and then he goes on some 5-minute soliloquy about Jordan and how amazing he's going to be and what his career is going to be like and blah blah blah. And again, my jaw just hit the table or the chair in front of me at the theater, because I'm like, that never happened. And it's moving and it's powerful and it's wonderful, but it didn't happen. I mean, again, it happened, but it was done by Rob Strasser and Peter Moore. So that was another one of my hair pulling moments.
That is an interesting note there. I actually, to your point on Rob and Peter, for those who don't know, Rob Strasser's played by Jason Bateman. He's the director of marketing, VP of marketing at that time.
That's correct.
And then Peter Moore is footwear designer.
No, he was actually Nike. Okay. He was creative director. So the whole putting him in the footwear mad scientist role is really not accurate. In fact, anyone who really knows footwear and as a sneakerhead knows that the Jordan 1, contrary to Sonny Vaccaro's or Matt Damon's statement, is not the world's most beautiful, amazing shoe ever created. Nobody, especially in the industry back in the 80s, you can't go from concept to finished shoe in a matter of weeks, right? I mean, the Jordan 1 was essentially a little bit of this and a little bit of that from what we already had in the repertoire. So that was not Peter. I mean, Peter was sort of shepherding it, but there was actually a footwear team that was working on it. No, Peter would be the one that would design the overall direction of the design creation for the company. So it'd be the poster program. I mean, he was much more involved in the direction of the company in terms of its design than some kind of crazy guy in the basement of a building with mad scientist undertones. I mean, a lot of people they're just going to roll their eyes when they saw that, and it was like, that's not Peter. And plus they called him Pete, which is also very weird. I mean, no one ever called him Pete, and in the movie they keep referring to him as Pete. So that's only one of those head scratchers.
He did do the logo though, right?
Yes, he did do the logo,
which would be creative direction, no doubt.
Right, but that was also, again, that was they kind of wink earlier where they say that Air Jordan, David Falk was the one that created the term Air Jordan, and in the movie they like, oh well, Peter supposedly has that same idea, and Peter told us that when he first heard the words Air Jordan, he thought it sounded more like the national airline for the country of Jordan, right? So he didn't come up with that name, nor did he ever claim to. So that was another one of those moments you're like, you don't need to do this. We already know David Falk came up with the name. It's okay to just say David Falk came up with the name.
That's cool. Okay, that's a good one. And I wondered if they were doing the whole basement thing as trying to portray the innovation kitchen. For people who don't know, the innovation kitchen is like a super top secret, sometimes underground, place where they develop all the footwear and do the research and the treadmills and all that. Was that your interpretation as well?
Yeah, I think, and that's one of the things where I cut some slack, right? So in the real life, Peter Moore was in a building in downtown Portland. That's where the creative and design folks were. Rob Strasser was in a building over near Washington Square, which is in Southwest Portland near Tigard. And then Phil Knight was in the main headquarters on Murray Boulevard, not too far from where the world headquarters is now. So all three of those gentlemen were in different buildings. So I totally understand the storytelling device of co-locating them, because how boring would it be to see them jumping into cars and driving back and forth all over to meetings. So I cut some big slack there, but yes, in fact, again, people really know their Nike history. Exeter in New Hampshire in 1984 was where pretty much all the R&D was going on. Now, there was no world headquarters campus. There was some R&D done in Portland, but it was done primarily in New Hampshire. So the Jordan itself, I believe, was done more in Portland. But yeah, so creating that little underground thing probably was a nod to the R&D facilities that came later. But I don't even know where the R&D facility was in terms of geographically, in terms of whether it was in a basement or not in '84. But I think that was done for cinematographer license, which I don't have a problem with that one, other than Peter's almost maniacal, like, it's the shoe, we'll have this,
right.
And then the whole,
go ahead.
Oh, then then them all sitting around and geniusly knowing that if they do a shoe that with too much red in it, it's going to be banned, and they're going to get a big fine, and they'll pay the fine, and all that was happenstance, right? There was no premeditation to try to get the NBA to ban the shoe. And the original NBA ban, the commissioner came back and said there's $1,000 fine. And it is true that Rob Strasser said $1,000. I'll write a check to the NBA right now for $80,000, essentially $1,000 per game. Well, the NBA, realizing that Nike would potentially do that, raised the fine to $5,000 on the second infraction, and there's either $10,000 on the third, or is a suspension of Jordan on the third. So basically, they said, we have. So that's what actually happened. But the scene of them all sitting in a room concocting, we need more red, more red. I was like, oh my God. First off, those people would not have been involved. That was the footwear design team, right? It wasn't Sonny. Probably wasn't. I mean, Strasser may have been involved because Rob was way more involved than they portrayed him in the movie. But yeah, that just, I laughed because we were just doing some simple math, right? They're basically all completely over their skis. Can't afford 250 at the same breath. In the movie, they say, well, we'll just write a check for $5,000 for all 80 games. That's $400,000. So you don't have $250,000 to sign Jordan, but you can kind of flippantly say, we'll pay $400,000 for this fine. It's like, come on, guys, come on.
Interesting. So, okay, I actually need to dig deeper on this Jordan fine. I think that that's one that's been told a lot. So what happened that first year that he wore it between Nike and the league?
So the actual shoe that was banned is the Airship. It was not the Jordan.
The precursor.
The Jordan was.
Jordan.
I'm sorry.
The precursor to the Air Jordan. Yeah. Okay.
Right. The Jordan was still in production. They were trying to get the Jordan ready for him by the time he played in the regular season. And if you remember, again, depending on your degree of sneakerheadedness, the Jordan didn't actually release at retail until I think it was March or April of '85. So what he was wearing in the earliest days in the preseason exhibition and then early days of the NBA was the Ship. And the Airship, though, the colors were in what the Jordan would be. So they were red and black and white. And the NBA did have a rule in place that a shoe had to be a certain percentage white. And all these rules about what it could and could not be. And so the shoe did violate that. And the NBA did threaten it. I think they did levy $1,000 fine. And that is what led Strasser to have that epiphany of creating the ad about, on October 18th, the NBA threw these shoes off the court or something like that, but you can get them. It was just conveniently not really mentioned that it was the Ship, not the Jordan. And then when the Jordan did come out, it was in the same colorway scheme. So, but no, Nike had to very quickly pivot and create a shoe that did conform with the NBA because once you start pulling the suspension rule, they know they have us. They had us. So that you can't just keep writing bigger checks when your player's not on the court.
Oh yeah. I worked in American football for a long time. In the NFL, they don't play that NBA stuff. They crack down on those players. You get once, twice, and they do not take lightly to uniform violations.
No, they do not.
That is fascinating. I'm a deep sneakerhead. I've done the whole nine, and I feel like I've always accepted that lore that they just paid the fine or banned. I don't think I actually realized that. So that's amazing. So I need to go back and look at the archive. So then a percentage white that they ended up landing on was 51% or whatever.
I think that's correct. It's 51%, and then it had to be the team's color. I don't know. Again, Matt on my team. I probably shouldn't say his last name because he'll probably get inundated with people calling. But Matt on my team is our basketball guru, so he could probably give you the whole 9 yards on that, or the whole court, whatever you want, basketball term.
Amazing.
But yeah, so those are the stories that jumped out at me as just like, okay, no, it didn't happen.
Well, I'll tell you this, those are all great. One of the things that was really interesting to me was how little the playbook for signing a big name athlete has changed in 40 years. It is, I couldn't help but notice, I got to work on some really high profile players that we were courting and trying to sign and then serving. And it is the exact same thing. You have relationships, those are stewarded, marketing comes in, helps set the vision, it's working with product to figure out the right product. It's a beautiful presentation, it's hosting them on campus. What Adidas is doing or what Under Armour is offering, you're very aware, and kind of what objections you're going to have to do. We roll out the presentation, we roll out the video. It's really fascinating. Of course, the budgets have all gone up, and you have, but I was really struck at how little that playbook has changed.
Well, it's funny you should say that, because it hasn't changed, but they're also, I noticed that some of the keystone parts have expanded, right? So in the earliest days, it was product. A little bit of money. We didn't have a lot of money, but a lot of product, and you got some cash. Usually, most players got a certain modest amount of cash, and then the pro club comes along, and they start getting a percentage. Well, then we do a couple of posters, like starting with Iceman, starting with George Gervin, Iceman, and those become popular. So now athletes, they're coming to us, and we want to sign them. They're like, yeah, I want X, O, and Y, and I want a poster, right? So that starts happening, and Peter Moore told us that, and others have told us, that was actually a bargaining chit with some of the agents, was, well, my guy wants a poster. So that develops over time, and then Nike starts doing some advertising, and Spike and Mike and Charles, and then David Robinson, and Little Penny, so now it's become, I want an ad, right? And then it morphed into, I want my own brand, like Swingman, with Griffey and Jumpman, of course, and and then Serena and LeBron all have their own logos, and then it becomes their own product line, the KD, things like that. So it went from a poster to this whole mass media conglomerate logo, branding. It's fascinating to see the evolution, and yet you're right, at the very central core, it's pretty much the same.
Yeah, the media changes, but the demand and the desire and the package is still the same. We will creatively showcase you to a new audience in a way that only Nike can. And, it's true. Nike is the best. And of course, we're super biased, but I think other people know that as well. Yeah, the ads, the athlete wants the ad, the signature, the brand, the logo, the social media post. They want to be on @Nike. They don't want to be on, one of the smaller handles. Like, there's all kinds of interesting demands. What do you think? So this is actually just very topical now. We've dove into the history. I'm actually really fascinated about this particular element. I feel like we're almost reaching this like breaking point in the industry. This has been the model for like 40 plus years now. And as you know, I don't think many people understand how hard it is to develop these ad campaigns, your own logo, a product development from start to finish takes 18 months. I mean, 2 years sometimes, on a fast track, maybe a little over a year, maybe on like a super fast track. And so I'm just curious, kind of, where do you see the future going? Will we keep this up? Will we be able to satisfy that? Do you think all these smaller brands keep popping up and serving different realms? Just curious on your kind of take on the industry currently.
Well, I mean, if you've worked at Nike for any length of time, you certainly heard the quote or the philosophy of Phil Knight, which is, Nike needs to listen to the voice of the athlete, right? So that means, when you marry that with the mission statement of to bring innovation and inspiration to every athlete in the world, with athlete being defined as, if you have a body, you're an athlete. So essentially everyone in the world, then you have it's so inspirational and aspirational, and it provides you with such a broad palette to play with. So if you listen to those people, if you listen to whether the athlete is the LeBron, the Serena, the pinnacle of the sport, or it's the people that just play every day recreationally, if you listen to them, then you kind of you know where they're going, and you either can lead and help them get there. It's really hard to pull somebody. I mean, the whole starting cross training like Nike did in the late 80s and into the 90s, that was pretty remarkable, right? I mean, because it was going in the opposite direction of everything that we and other brands have been marketing. Oh, you play tennis, you need a tennis shoe. Oh, you run, you need a running shoe. All of a sudden we're like, or you could just wear this they're a trainer and you could do multiple sports. And even within Nike, there were some people that were like, are you crazy? You can't tell people they can wear this like basketball and go for a run. That's going to hurt our business. And it didn't. Instead, cross training becomes over $1 billion business out of zero, right? I mean, less than 10 years ago, from not, zero to over $1 billion for Nike. And that to me is just, again, having some courage to take an idea that you believe has some merit. I don't know if they ever believed it was going to be $1 billion, but to go against their own model because they felt like it was something that consumers observed. That's what, I mean, Tinker Hatfield was allegedly, or not allegedly, was at a YMCA in Portland, just observing actual people working out, and he saw that they were doing multiple things in one shoe. So it wasn't like we said, let's take them somewhere else. It's more like, they're going there, let's go with them, and then we can pull them along, with obviously you get Bo Jackson. I mean, White and Kenny doesn't hurt to have them on your team, right? I mean, seriously. So I don't know if I'm even answering your question, but I mean, that's what came to my mind when you said that.
Totally fair. Yeah. I've always feel like I draw a little bit of a distinction there and listen to the voice of the athlete. I still feel like you listen to the voice of the truest definition of athlete, and we inspire those who have a body, anybody in the world. And, to a certain degree, I think it's what helped Nike, but it's always like, people are always like, why don't my running pants have a pocket? I'm like, well, they're developed for people who are really running, not just kind of casually going out and running errands in their athleisure,
Right.
And so I'd be interested to see the kind of collision of athleisure and sport, as we truly know it. Okay, I feel like I have two last questions. Before we lose our time, like I said, I was an Eakin. I feel very privileged to have been an Eakin. For those who don't know, Eakin is Nike spelled backwards. Eakin's job's to know Nike backwards and forwards. My understanding is that the Eakins were founded in 81, and that Phil has some vested interest in them. Any insight can you share on the Eakin program, or anything you know about it or its history?
Well, yeah, it's a very long and remarkable history, and yes, it is essentially they are and were and are ambassadors. I mean, they're the people that work with our retail clients. They work with, they try to make sure that Nike's heritage, culture, special sauce, whatever term you want to use for it, is shared and understood, but also and explaining in every, the technology. So you want Foot Locker employees to know more and be more educated about this particular cushioning platform or that particular design, even where the eyelets are, that Eakin, again, my understanding of Eakins, that was what one of their original charges was to be that brand ambassador, that a design expert who could go and talk to retail accounts throughout, not just the larger ones, but like Foot Locker, but smaller mom and pop and specialty stores. And it's just never gone away, right? I don't know if they travel as much as they used to. I don't know, because some of them were literally road warriors that were just constantly going from one tiny market to the next. And it sounds amazing. Almost every Eakin I've ever met has told some amazing stories and just are just so passionate about the brand that you just can't help but you want to sit back and go, tell me another story, So
Yeah.
One of my favorite stories, though, is there was a man named Tom Carmody who used to be with Nike, and he actually left Nike to go to Reebok. And that wasn't done a lot in those days. And usually if you left, you were kind of like, persona non grata. But Tom was very gracious to talk with me when I first started doing the historian role. And so he was telling me that when he got to Reebok, Paul Fireman liked the idea of what Nike was doing with Eakins. And he said, we need to start our own Eakin program. And he kept calling it Eakin like that. And then Tom basically leaned over and said, it's not an acronym for it's just Nike spelled backwards. And Paul's like, oh, well, but then we won't call it Eakin. I laughed because it was like such an endearing little story.
That is so great. That one's been told for a long time. Various levels of that story have made it to where they listed the job, out there, and then eventually took it down. But that sounds more accurate, probably. Okay, my last one for you then is thoughts on, from what I've gathered, you helped pull the archives for Phil as he was writing Shoe Dog. Any insight on Phil the man, maybe people don't understand. I found his characterization in the movie. I kind of the way I don't know him, but I felt like I don't imagine him cowering from the board of directors. I don't also imagine him doing forgiveness meditations and kumbaya on his couch. So just curious,
Yeah.
any insight from you or what your thoughts are on Phil the man?
Well, yeah. So I talked with Bob Woodell, right, who was Nike's a fourth employee and was on the board of directors and was president of Nike for a brief time in '83 and '84, right around when the Jordan thing was happening. And so I asked him, this was like literally about a month ago, I said, is that any part of that true? Were you guys thinking about cutting basketball? And it was, putting a lot of pressure on Phil. And he said, oh God, no. He goes, Phil told us what to do. The board didn't tell him what to do. He told the board. He handpicked most of the board members, and he would essentially just tell us, here's what we're gonna do today. And we would go, okay. So that was just to create, I think, a false sense of drama. But no, the way Phil was portrayed bothered a lot of people, including myself. And that whole cringy scene where he comes in late to the meeting and he starts talking about how important he is, and then when they said, people are going to remember me, people will remember me. That is 180% not Phil Knight, so that was difficult to watch. I mean, Rob Strasser being played by Jason Bateman was odd, just because Rob's nickname was Rolling Thunder and he was like 300 and some odd pounds and a force to be reckoned with, rolling, I mean, with a nickname like Rolling Thunder, and just a litany of what today would be career-ending HR violations, being played by a wonderful actor. I mean, I love Jason Bateman, but he was essentially kind of like Michael Bluth from Arrested Development, not Rob Strasser. So that was probably the one that I scratched my head on. And then the Phil, a couple scenes with Phil just acting like he's a prima donna, or the whole diva, the whole mystical crystals thing. It was like, no, that's not Phil.
No, that doesn't strike me as him either. Okay. Well, this is so much fun, Scott. I feel like I could do this for a couple hours.
I'm retired.
I know. Hey, well, we'll do a part 2 someday. Someday I think I will officially start a podcast, but it'll probably be, video and all that stuff. So until then, this will be great. And I'll send you whatever I'm able to cut up. And I really appreciate your time.
I'll remember what shirt I wore. So if we have to re-record something, you can come back in and make it look like it happened today.
Absolutely. I will. Okay. I'm going to